The Drought Crisis. In-depth coverage on 10news.com.
Good morning, everybody. I'm ABC 10 News meteorologist Megan Parry, and all week our script stations all across the West have been putting an emphasis on our drought crisis. We're continuing that coverage today, focusing on our local drought situation as well as the rest of the state. And here to discuss this important topic with me is National Weather Service meteorologist Alex Tardy. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, Megan. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, thanks for being here. You're one of my favorite people to interview. I just feel like you are a wealth of knowledge, and you have so much to share. So we also want to hear from you guys. We want to hear from our audience. So please answer or ask any questions that you have in the comments section. We'll be monitoring those as we go through this Facebook Live and answering as we go along. So let's get started though, shall we? All right. So California as a whole has received about half of its average precipitation for the water year, which begins on October 1st. 2 consecutively dry years have left reservoirs about half full or even less for some. And these precipitation deficits combined with very high temperatures, in fact, some areas have seen all-time record high temperatures, have reduced stream flow, dried out soils, and stressed vegetation. We're seeing the effects of wildfires in California this year, which have scorched more than 3 times the amount of land we saw in last year at this same time. And last year wasn't a historic year for wildfires. So, Alex, what can you tell us about the local water content level in our vegetation right now and what this means for wildfire season when it really ramps up for us here in Southern California?
Yeah, it seems like I'm always the bearer of bad news, but I'm glad I can be on to explain things. And first off, we're not talking about just because it's summertime and California sees dry weather. So right off the bat, we know that that's normal. Every year we have a dry season, which is typically the summer months, June through October. What we're talking about is something abnormal, something unusual, something extreme, actually. When we talk about the fuel moisture or the vegetation that is around us, it's at levels that we've never seen before, so record levels. And it includes Southern California, all of California, and it's basically a gauge of how severe the fire season potentially is. So, of course, you need a spark to have a wildfire, but it doesn't take much when conditions are this dry, this severe. We measure the fuel, we measure the live fuel moisture, and we measure the dead fuel moisture. And both of those are at record dry levels. And we've been seeing this now, not just here in July, but the past several months. And I think that's a big part of why what you just mentioned, we're already off to a unusual record start for the wildfire season here in California.
Yeah, it's funny. Funny is not the right word, but we always seem to tend to say that. But I feel like every single time we've done wildfire coverage, whenever we have a wildfire that breaks out, one of the things I say is we have record low fuel moisture, and that just seems to happen every single year. Have you found that is happening earlier in the season, or I guess earlier in the year than it has in years past?
Yes, for sure. So we're seeing the trend in most of California, or even in most of the West, that we're having longer dry seasons. And so that means shorter condensed winter season or rainy season. And on top of that, we're seeing more heat waves. And the heat waves are not just hot because it's summer or you're in a desert or you're in the southern latitudes. They're unusually hot and record-breaking hot. So June 2021 was the hottest June on record for about half of San Diego County. So that includes our mountains, our deserts, and it was worse in Northern California. And so we're all in this together when it comes to fire season. But yeah, absolutely. We're seeing the fall go deeper into the winter. So like last year, we saw severe fire weather conditions all the way into January, really. And so these longer dry seasons and these warmer summers and warmer falls, it's all compounding effect on our fire weather conditions. And it's not a coincidence that we keep talking about drier conditions for our fire weather conditions, in July, in September, in December. it's all tied together, unfortunately, these severe conditions. And it's really much of the West and not just California, but certainly California is the center of it.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk about all-time record high temperatures every once in a while, and I feel like we've been talking about them even more often in the last few years. Last year, you recall, we had all-time record high temperatures in many spots, including in Escondido. And then this year, parts of Oregon and Washington saw several days of all-time record high temperatures, which just like blows my mind. You should do that once every so many years, hopefully not very often, and to see them shatter it one day and then break it the next day and then break it the next day. Even Vegas recently, I believe this week, actually set some all-time record high temperatures. So not only the dry conditions, but the heat, which is evaporating all of the water that is out there, making things even compounding, as you said, even making things a whole lot worse out there.
Yeah, it's a major stress. And you made a good point about the evaporation. That is something that probably even myself, I don't think about as much. But when you get into a cycle of drier than normal conditions, like a dry winter we had this past winter, where we saw 50% or less of precipitation in Southern California and all of California, and you're talking, this is year 2 for Northern California. The reservoirs are showing on the screen there. Year 2 in Northern California with less than 50% of average precipitation. Those compounding effects really take a toll on all conditions, water supply. When the temperatures get as hot as they are and the conditions are already severely dry or low humidity, you have even more evaporation. When you have that cycle, it almost kind of spirals out of control. And it seems like we were just in this, right? We were in this in 2012 to 2016, which at that time was the worst drought and warmest temperatures on record for most of California. And now we're right in the heart of yet another severe extreme drought affecting the whole state and really affecting all the West. Pacific Northwest saw temperatures of 110 in places like Portland, which is really unheard of. When you start talking about temperatures that extreme, that's the temperature you expect in Borrego area, right? And not in the Pacific Northwest. So each one of these events adds up. So when we say, it's an extreme event or we have a daily record high or it was hotter than usual, maybe not a big deal for that day, but when you start talking weeks and months at a time, it really becomes a big deal.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned that, we were in a mega drought, 2012 to 2016. How does this drought compare to that one so far? Because we're still pretty early on in this one, 2 years into it. That one lasted for 5 or 6 years. How do we compare at this point to that drought?
Yeah, so the start of this summer here, there's different ways to kind of measure it or different metrics, but one good metric is water supply. So California is really good, advanced technologically and management-wise in distributing its water. So we're drought resilient, basically, is what I'm trying to say. We have an extensive reservoir system, more than anywhere in the country, an extensive recycling program, even here in Southern California. We have desalinization plant, even here in Carlsbad, right down the road. So we plan and prepare for situations like this. However, when we started this summer, our major reservoirs in central Northern California, Oroville, Shasta, they were at records that we don't want to be at. They were basically at levels as low as what we saw in 1976, 77. And that is kind of our benchmark or measurement for most severe drought in terms of not having enough water. And that's really what you think of with drought. So you can measure drought in terms of precipitation, that falls out of the sky. You can measure it in terms of like how dry the soil is and how much evaporation is occurring. You can measure it by snowpack. And this year we kind of are seeing everything laying on top of each other. And the water supply is, to me, probably the biggest measurement because it really takes into account everything. More evaporation, lack of snowpack, lack of rainfall. And the water supply is at the lowest levels we've seen since 76, 77. We don't want to be at that area because obviously here in 2021, there's a lot more people, there's a lot more demand, there's a lot more use than what we had in 76, 77.
Yeah, that's a good point to make. And we have a viewer question that actually goes right in line with my next question. So I'm going to start it off with the city of Sacramento is invoking its water shortage contingency plan, asking residents to reduce consumption by 10% as our drought in California intensifies. City manager Howard Chan moved the city into stage 1 of its contingency plan, which mandates a 10% cut by city government and a voluntary call to residents and businesses to do the same. So the question is, should we be worried here in San Diego about the potential for water rationing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think to start off the answer of that question, I think we should look at the big picture. We live in the West. It's a semi-arid climate, and water and water shortage or water management or water restrictions or water reductions, conserving water basically should be something that's always on our mind. We live in the West. We live in a semi-arid climate. Now, that said, when we go into these episodes of drought, lack of precipitation, unusually hot summers or unusually hot conditions overall, we should be thinking about it even more. And sometimes it's the little things like shown on the screen there. Sometimes it's the little things, turning off the water, shorter showers, managing your irrigation of your lawn, better. Things, that we can do. And it's not just your household, it's the business, it's the whole city, being involved with management, running your sprinklers in the middle of the day at 1 p.m. I always see that when I'm driving around. I'm like, why? That actually can damage your yard, that can burn your grass, and that leads to massive evaporation. Imagine when you take a shower and you run outside in 85-degree temperatures in full sun. You dry off pretty quick, right? Magically. So there's things like that you can do, but keep in mind, that's not something we should do only when we're in a drought like now in California, which the governor's declared most of the counties officially in a drought. But it's something you can do all the time and be in a habit of. It's kind of like recycling. You don't just recycle it because you had a party at your house or something. You recycle daily in your average lifestyle.
Yeah, we live in the desert Southwest. That just needs to be a mindset. When you're brushing your teeth, just turn the water off when you're actually brushing your teeth part. It's simple things like that. I know a lot of people, well, hopefully more people, but a lot of people, as they're washing their dishes in the sink, they collect that water and then they use it to water their plants. So it's little things that we can all do. But as you mentioned, it's also extremely important that businesses do more on their end because they're producing so much more and can have such a bigger impact as far as water conservation and anything really to do with climate change and being more environmentally friendly. So we're all in this together. We really do all need to be doing our part, small and large. All right, so my next question. So last year was a record-shattering wildfire season, as we talked about. Over 4 million acres burned in California alone. This year, we're already off to a bigger start to the season. Most of California has had 2 consecutive dry years, while San Diego, we were lucky last year. We had that late spring rains come in the April month mostly. How do you expect San Diego's wildfire season when we're mostly in that moderate drought category, whereas most of the state is in that extreme or exceptional drought? They're in much worse conditions than we are. How do you see us comparing? How do you think our wildfire season will go? Because ours is really yet to come.
Yeah, it really is just the beginning of our wildfire season normally. What concerns me the most is our overall weather pattern here in the Pacific, the West Coast, the Pacific Ocean, really hasn't changed over the past 2.5 years. When we look at the jet stream, which brings us storms or brings us heat waves if the storms miss us, if we look at the weather patterns for the past 2 years, regardless of El Nino or La Nina, the weather pattern hasn't changed. And I think the reflection of that is these unusually warm temperatures that continue here in year 2, these unusually dry conditions that have continued here in year 2 for Northern California, now year 1 for Southern California. You mentioned the wildfire season, over 4 million acres burned. And so here we are now in year 2, and we're at a pace to at least equal that, if not exceed that. That's just not an area you want to be. And I think it's a direct reflection of the weather pattern. So I think we're in this for the long haul, and we we really need to be prepared. If you're not prepared already, now is the time, because we don't know where the next wildfire is going to start. But we do know that conditions are susceptible to massive and aggressive wildfires anywhere in California, including now in Southern California, despite all that rain that we had last year. Matter of fact, that rain that we had last year, that actually makes conditions a little bit worse, because it added a lot of weeds. You probably saw even in your own property in some cases, weeds and flowers and things that didn't grow during the drought of 2012 to 2016. But when we had a very wet year, and then we had another wet year and a wet spring of 2020, probably hard to remember. That seems so long ago. But April of 2020, we had a soaking rain and record-breaking rain in Southern California. But that's the type of situation that adds more fuel, like shown on the screen there. I call it weeds, but the firefighters call it fuel. You can call it vegetation or whatever you want to call it. There's a lot to burn out there, and it just takes a spark from whatever reason, and it's going to be devastating when it develops. And when we get into our Santa Ana season, that's our normal season, right? That's still yet to come.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I just always think that when we get a lot of rain, we're so grateful. We're like, thank goodness, maybe we get out of a drought or whatever it is. Either way, conditions improve. And then it's like, wait, but now there's a lot more brush out there. There's a lot more vegetation. What's going to happen when everything dries out in the summer and then the Santa Ana winds come in the fall? Is that brush going to burn very quickly? Because it's going to dry out during the summer months. It always does. So it's always interesting. It's like, we want the rain, but at the same time, that rain makes everything more lush, and then it dries out and dies, and then we worry about wildfires in the fall. So speaking of the rains that we saw in April of last year, which were great, I just remember when I was doing my broadcasting, just very, very happy, because it was just us. It was Southern California, Northern California, Central California didn't get that rain. So I've attributed a lot of why San Diego is in a moderate drought, a lot better conditions compared to the rest of the state, because of the rain that we saw last year. Do you see other reasons why we're in a moderate drought compared to why other portions of the state are in an extreme or severe drought? So I had this question. A viewer also asked this question. Thank you for everybody for sending your questions, and please keep them coming. We are monitoring those. So what are your thoughts on that, Alex?
So the short answer is yes. Precipitation is a big factor in that. We had a wet 2019, 2020. We had a wet year before that as well. And I always feel, like I said earlier, I bring the bad news. And so maybe a viewer's thinking, well, what do you want? If you can't get rain and it's still fire season is worse, well, what we want is some normalcy, some consistency in terms of temperatures, in terms of the winter season. But what we're seeing is the opposite of that. We're seeing extremes on either end. Either we have too much rain, or we have no rain at all during the most of the winter, or we have temperatures that are hot in February and temperatures that are hot in July. And so overall, it doesn't add up very well. So I think another factor, though, in San Diego County, and this is a big one, is our diversity of water is significant compared to the rest of California. So I mentioned earlier, recycling water, local water supply, desalinization plant, the Colorado River, where we get the majority of our water from here in San Diego County. And some viewers might be thinking, wait, I thought it was the Sierra Nevada. Well, that's just a portion of the water that we get here in San Diego County. So we have a very complex system here. And in Southern California, there's a lot of places like Palm Springs and Anaheim that have underground water storage as well that you and I don't even see. So there's a very complex water management and supply program going on in Southern California. And it's different. So Northern California is much more dependent on rain and snow. The reservoir fills up. Okay, we're good. Reservoir is almost empty. We're bad. In Southern California, we had a part of it's because of our population, the need, and the other part of it is our distance from where it really rains and snows, where it counts, meaning the mountains. So we have a long stretch and complex water supply system. So that's sometimes why we lag the rest of the state, even if everything else looks like we should be equal in terms of drought. That is part of why we might lag as well.
Yeah, that's a good answer. So, there are definitely different reasons for why things all happen. So you were speaking about normals. As you know, the latest U.S. climate normals came out this year, and San Diego as a whole, the entire county is trending warmer and drier. And if I recall, when we talked to you when that first happened, was that it's not just the summer months or it's not just the winter months, it's every single month is trending warmer and drier. What do you think that means for, our future as we head forward into this warmer and drier world as climate change continues to get worse?
Yes. So for our viewers who are not aware of what normal really means, normal in terms of science and meteorology and climatology means 30 years averaged together. It's not a straight average when it comes to precipitation, but it is a straight average when it comes to temperature. So it's whatever you learned in math school, to figure out 30 years and divide by 30, the total amount. So 30 years gets updated actually every 10 years. And Megan just mentioned it was just recently updated, kind of like the census. The population gets updated every 10 years officially. So we do that with weather too, with climate. And we just updated it in 2020. So we're running normals from 1991 all the way to 2020. And what we're looking for is trends, whether it's trending drier, wetter, warmer, colder. And unfortunately, all the trends were drier and all the trends were warmer, not just in Southern California. It was actually United States wide. Almost every location was warmer. In the West, it was significantly warmer, especially inland over our mountains, the places we consider cooler, especially over our deserts. And it was also drier, in some cases significantly drier, like in our deserts, Anza Borrego area. And so these trends are potentially a clue to our future climate. And the future climate indicates, if you just look at the prediction, indicates drier, especially inland areas like mountains and deserts. But it also indicates warmer, especially inland mountains and deserts. And so we're seeing this already in our new normals, our new averages. And unfortunately, the predictions of the future continue to indicate the same thing, that the trend of warming and the trend of drying. It doesn't mean it won't flood. It doesn't mean it won't flood. In fact, there's indications that we will see more severe storms or even atmospheric rivers, but they'll be short duration, kind of all at once. Kind of like the April storm that you talked about. That was an exciting storm for a meteorologist, but it was just too much rain at once. It was a record-breaking rainfall for northern San Diego County, and all came at once. And you can't manage or regulate that. It's hard to collect that water properly because it all runs off to the ocean. So the trend of our averages or our normals continues to be on that climate change side, which is warmer and drier.
Yeah. So far, as 2 more questions for you, then we'll wrap it up. But as far as our year goes so far, where do we rank as far as dryness goes in San Diego in particular? If you have, the San Diego and maybe Ramona, if you know offhand, where are we ranking? How dry is this year compared to past years?
So when we look at our rankings for precipitation, you mentioned earlier the water year is October 1st through September 30th. And people might be wondering, why? Well, that's our normal storm track. That's our normal rainy season, which is the fall through the spring. It's not normal to see much rain in the middle of January or even in May in Southern California. So when you add up the October through September, we're in the top 10 for San Diego. We're in the top 10 for Ramona. We have places like our deserts, Anza Borrego, which are in the top 3. There's places like Palm Springs, which are number 1. They've seen less than an inch of rain the past water year. If you equate that to a percentage, like compared to average, that's about 10% of their normal annual. I know it's a desert, but they still receive several inches of rain. So all of our areas, including San Diego, are in the top 10 driest. If you're thinking about, what was the driest year, we just had one of them back in 2017 where we had 3.3 inches of rain for the whole year. And our average that we just learned about is about 10 inches of rain. So we, this year as well, are well short of that average. What are we sitting at? Around 4.5 inches?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, well short of our average, and it would be a miracle to make up for it. It would be a crazy thunderstorm or tropical system. And again, what would happen in that case? It would be way too much rain at once. So our deficit is massive.
Yeah, too much of a good thing. And then we get do the flooding like they're dealing with Arizona and New Mexico with the monsoon moisture. You know, they're getting all of this rain, but it's coming too quickly and it's just leading to these massive floods. All right, so I want to wrap up with some positive news and some call to actions for mitigation. So, you know, a big thing, as we already kind of talked about, businesses and companies, they really need to do their part to be more environmentally friendly. They need to do their part more so to conserve water. Actually, I guess I have two follow-up questions on mitigation. So we spend billions of dollars every single year fighting wildfires, rebuilding after wildfires. And I know that there's starting to be finally a switch towards, hey, let's spend those billions of dollars before the wildfires come. What do you think we need to do in order to, you know, even if it does cost billions of dollars, but it helps prevent record-setting wildfire season after record wildfire season? What do you think needs to be done, you know, in the West as a whole, but in particular California?
Well, that's a loaded question.
No.
And I don't know if I can answer it in a few sentences, but I will say this. So just like I said in the beginning, first, we need to recognize what's going on, okay? And we have to accept it, and we have to understand the science and the limitation of the science. And so it's not dry because it's summer. It's not dry because it's California. It's not hot because it's summer. So once we get that kind of out of there, we're talking about unusual, abnormal conditions. And so how do we mitigate that situation? Well, in the 50s and 60s, we did it with bigger and larger and more reservoirs. And we're kind of capped out with that. And so in terms of the wildfire situation, in the 70s and 80s, we started, you know, managing the forests more, and especially in the 90s, where the U.S. Forest Service and CAL FIRE and other groups started managing the forest in terms of like burning debris that's on the ground and keeping the forest clean, basically to prevent devastating and large fires. And there's only so much you can do. The numbers are staggering how much land has to be managed and maintained. But what is obvious is that it only takes, you know, 1 or 2 heat waves. It only takes 1 or 2 lightning outbreaks like what happened in Northern California last year. It only takes 1 year of drought like we're seeing in Southern California for all that acreage of land, all the area that we live to become, you know, under stress, to become dangerous, if you will, to become threatened. And so I don't know if there's one thing we can do, but we definitely don't need to panic. We don't need to think, well, it's all doom and gloom. But everyone has to start doing their part. First, understanding what's going on. Second, accepting what's going on. And then third, working, you know, as your family or working with your business or as your agency into things that we can do to minimize and prevent. And that might be something as simple as, you know, not building as many homes up against the wildland area. That might be as simple as putting defensible space around your own home. I mean, how many people have actually thought of doing that? If you live in Ramona or Alpine or Escondido or even some of the coastal areas, have you thought about, you know, building and developing and maintaining defensible space in your area? So that's one less house that the firefighters have to save because the defensible space may save it in the event of a fire. So there's a lot of things you can do, like we talked about with water, but you can also do with wildfire. But all of us have to be involved. We have to be aware of our surroundings and what's going on. Most of our wildfires, and this is where I'll kind of end it, in Southern California, and this doesn't apply for all the West, but certainly Southern California, are the cause of man-made type incidents: cigarettes, vehicles, lawn equipment, accidental sparks from you know, maybe fireworks or something. A lot of the fires, the ignition, because the fires aren't just developing spontaneously, they are caused by an ignition, and a lot of them are man-made here in Southern California. So maybe something as simple as being more careful, everyone being more careful, especially during the critical times of year like now and the fall.
Yeah, that's definitely some really great advice. And, we'll kind of leave it with, that's what you need to do. Clear the defensible space away from your home, but do it when it's, safer to do it. Don't do it when there's Santa Ana winds and you're using a chainsaw or equipment of some sort, electrical equipment that could spark a fire. Check underneath your vehicles. How many times have we had fires start because a car was dragging something and it sparked on the side of the road, and then that turned into a wildfire. So it's little things that we can do. Cigarettes should be an easy one. Don't throw those out your window. Make sure that they're out. You don't want to litter anyway, so it's always good advice for that anyway. And then, of course, always just go over your evacuation plan every single year, maybe a couple of times during the year as we get closer to the Santa Ana season. Go over your evacuation plan with your family. Make sure you have your kit ready to go if you do have to leave very quickly. I have a list because I don't really live in an area where we get wildfires, but but it could happen anywhere. So I have a list of things to grab so that it's very, very quick to grab those things if we need. And keep your kids and your pets in mind. Make sure that you have toys for your kids. If they have any medication, if your dogs have any medication, the types of food that they need, have that all ready to go, because when a wildfire does spark, and if it sparks next to your home, and especially if there's Santa Ana winds, that situation changes so quickly, and you may just have minutes to, get away from your home and get to somewhere safe and get everything that you want. So just make sure you have that ready to go, especially as we move into the more peak wildfire season for us here in Southern California. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. A huge thank you to National Weather Service meteorologist Alex Tardy for sharing your wealth of knowledge and expertise with us. And of course, this is just a small part of the extensive drought crisis coverage that we've been doing on 10news.com. It's right on our banner. So if you just go to 10news.com, you will see right on the homepage a big banner that says drought crisis. It's not just here. It's all of our stations across the West that have been really focusing on the drought because it is so devastating and it's so bad, in particular this year, but it's something that we talk about every single year. So if you want more resources, if you want more information, just go to 10news.com and click on the top for drought crisis. Again, thank you, Alex, so much for being here. It's always an absolute pleasure to talk with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And you made a good point at the end, and I'll say it too. I'll back it up. Watch the weather forecast. Watch Megan's weather forecast, and so that you are doing just the small things to be prepared and situationally aware of what's going on around your house and your neighborhood.
Yeah, definitely true. So we work together. So media works with the National Weather Service, so we're in it together. So we're getting our information together. So yeah, anything that, we're trying to get the information out. The National Weather Service is trying to get the information out. You just have to pay attention to it. So some good advice there. All right. Well, we will leave it there. 10news.com if you guys want any more information on the drought crisis. And other than that, have a happy and safe weekend, everybody.
The Drought Crisis. In-depth coverage on 10news.com.